Hey, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Blind Ambition with Jack Kelly. It's your friend Rick from Blind, and today we're going to flip the script a little bit. And actually, Jack, dun 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 dun, dun you're going to be in the spotlight. I'm going to introduce everyone to you. So, Jack, welcome aboard.
Yeah.
You're the founder and CEO of the Compliance Search Group, one of the leading and most trusted executive search firms specializing in recruiting finance and banking professionals. That's folks specialized in compliance, legal, regulatory, risk management, audit, corporate governance, accounting, tax, and probably
Mhm.
more. You know, the audience, you all know Jack as being passionate about advocating for job seekers and working professionals. He gives back as a Forbes senior contributor, covering the latest in kind of workplace trends and also providing like actual tactical career advice and kind of insider tips from his background as a recruiter for more than 20 years. You're the founder of the recruiting startup We Recruiter, and of course, the co host of this podcast, The Blind Ambition with Jack Kelly. Is that right? Thanks for
That
coming on the
sounds
show,
good.
Jack.
Well, thank you. Hey, I think it's cool. It helps. We probably had what, 150 episodes. And I think people could get a vibe about who we are, but we really never properly introduced ourselves, which we probably should have done day one. So we've only 150 episodes later that we thought of it, or you thought of it, Rick. And I'm glad. I think this is cool because we can give some insight. And also, as a humble brag, I've also written two books, career-related books about how to get a
Right.
job during tough times, which is very appropriate right now for people. So I got to tell you, it's been a crazy journey. It's recruiting, and I don't know how many recruiters you know, but it's one of those areas like you fall into. It's not as if you grow up and you're a little kid and you say, "Hey, I want to be an astronaut. I want to be a doctor." Now, I guess nowadays, I want to be a tech CEO, but they would never say, "I want to be a recruiter." I mean, that's just like off the radar scope. And just to give some insights behind the curtain, most recruiters, and I don't think they would be mad at me for sharing this, they they went into recruiting after trying, and this is me. I got to tell you, this is true. You fail at a whole bunch of other things, and then finally, somehow, you just fall into recruiting because that's just one of the jobs that you've been trying along that continuum. And finally, for a lot of people, it clicks, and either they're super successful and they stay in it for a long time, or they're like, last for a bit and then leave.
I mean, I'm going to tease you and add to
Yeah.
the dog pile if you'll allow me.
Mhm.
But, as a PR professional, I've got to say it's got to be the same thing.
Similar,
Like,
yeah.
no one really wakes up and says, you know what? I want to get a college degree and I want to ghostwrite for an executive or a CEO. Or I want to tell executives like what not to say when they speak with a reporter. Like very, very few and far in between. In terms of kind of um career ambitions
Mhm.
for a kid or an aspiring graduate, I'd say.
It is interesting how some people could know. We've had guests on the show who know at an early age what they want to do. They're coding when they're like 3 months old, and that's what they're going to be. But then
Right.
others we've had, and I really respect these people who will say, "Hey, I tried this." Like Sean Kim from Kajabi, I remember, first guy who was saying that on this podcast was like, "Hey, I failed at this and failed at that," and I was dumbstruck. Like, why are you leading with failing? And he would be, well, that's how it works. You fail, you learn, you iterate, and you move forward. And it's been an eye-opening experience kind of interacting with these people. And you're right. Like we fall into these things. I I became a recruiter because I tried a bunch of other stuff, which in a way, I guess I could applaud myself for having the guts to say, hey, I'm going to try, you know, working on Wall Street. I could try doing something else and so forth. But then if I'm not really crazy about it, to say, you know what, I'm not crazy about it. I'm going to cut my losses, or not even cut my losses. Say I want to see something else. And then, in particular with recruiting, what ends up happening, you go to a recruiter. In my case, in New York City, and you meet with recruiting agency. And here's a thing that happens a lot. If you have like schmoozability and you have like a little bit of the gift of gab, they'll come back and say, huh, Jack, have you ever considered being a recruiter? And of course, I would say, no, I never really had any thoughts of that. I didn't come for you for this. I came for some job that I was interested in on Wall Street. And
Right.
but then they would sell you on, hey, here's why it's so great. But I've always had, Rick, this is really interesting. Ever since I was a kid, I don't know why. It could be because my grandpa, but I didn't even know him. He passed away. He ran a small store, right? Small, I think, shoe store. And he was like the only one in the family who was an entrepreneur. And I thought that was really cool. And it must have stuck in my mind because even as a young kid, I was like, I would want to run my own business. So then when I was kind of knocking around for a bunch of years, and when this guy, told me about recruiting, the light bulb went on. And I don't know if I've ever told you the story. So after speaking to this person about doing recruiting, I had a friend who I work with on Wall Street he was an analyst, and he goes, Jack, I I'm very good friends with this guy Ed Caligari, who at the time owned a very large, very successful executive search firm. And he goes, Jack, I'll introduce you, and he'll be honest with you. I go to the guy's office, and Ed was just a gentleman, a really nice guy, completely down to earth. And this is way before, the pandemic. So you would be face to face, you'd be in the office. And I'm walking around the office and I'm looking around. Everyone's on the phone. There's a buzz in the air. Everyone seemed like jazzed and motivated. I'm like, huh. And so I got more interested. Then I started really talking with Ed. And honest to God, if he was like Brad Pitt or one of those like really just like amazing kind of guys, George Clooney, I'd be honest, at that time at my age, then I would have been intimidated in saying, I don't think I'm ever going to do this. But because he was so approachable, he was so down to earth, and he was such like a regular guy that I was like, oh, if he can do it, I can do it. And then right away, I went back to my recruiter and said, you know what? I'm going to do it. Because in my mind, I was thinking, hey, if this guy can do it, and it wasn't an ego of mine, but like he seemed like a regular, normal guy. I figured I'm a regular, normal guy. So if he could do it, why can't I? And then I started and I fell in love with it because, as you mentioned in the introduction, I really enjoy helping people. And I know that sounds so helping people, right? But it's true because what ends up happening if like you place somebody, not only do you make money doing it, but it's like a great feeling. It's a dopamine hit because now you feel, hey, I took Rick, who was working at, ABC Widget Company, unhappy, miserable. The boss is like a micromanager. I'm able to find Rick this better job, more money, more opportunity, more growth. And then like their life is changed. So I get paid, and just to let people know, I'll be very transparent. When recruiters, they get paid only when they play somebody. And it's usually about 20, 25, 30% of the base annual salary. So if you play somebody for 100,000, 200,000, 250, 300,000, and you're getting 20, 25%, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money coming in. So I hit it very lucky because I I worked with compliance people, and these are the people at the time. This is going back 20 years ago. These are the folks who are like, they considered back office, paper shufflers, and they're really, they weren't valued. And I was thinking, instead of, and this might be a kind of a takeaway lesson for people, instead of going after like investment bankers that are sexier or the traders that were sexier, I figured, wait, why knock my head against the wall fighting against all these others where this space is kind of underserved. No one's really paying attention to it. So maybe I could come in there and really be the big shot there. And sure enough, I moved in there as a sleepy area. I was able to really build. And then I lucked out because this became the time when there's just all these crises, all these issues on Wall Street, all these problems. So compliance all of a sudden became so important because they felt like, hey, insider trading, you would have they had to put in anti-money laundering KYC because you had 9/11 terrorists, were funneling money to do bad stuff. And so sometimes you're just lucky. So you hit that. So like it was just a straight up rocket ship where there was just so much demand. It was unbelievable. And it's like, this is amazing. How did I fall into this? It's so crazy. So it's weird. It's weird how these careers go, where sometimes you're in the right place. Like I'll share this with a lot of job seekers that, a lot of times you're in the wrong place at the wrong time and it sucks. But every once in a while, you get in the right place at the right time and it clicks. And then you're golden. And then it works.
I mean, I kind of want to break that
Yeah.
down a little bit because it seems that, in broad strokes, like you talk about how you kind of like almost accidentally landed into recruiting and
Mhm.
executive search, but it seems like you had the hard skills underlying, right? Where there was a mentor that brought you along, showed you the ropes of the business, almost like an apprenticeship. And through your like own kind of personal experience and your kind of spirit of entrepreneurialism, that you found this like green
Mhm.
space in terms of, well, no one cares about this back office, or no one cares about
Mhm.
kind of this whole class, this whole job
Mhm.
function of professional. I'm going to specialize and focus there because no one else is doing it. I'm going to serve that community. And then to your point, kind of the luck happens. And so it's almost like kind of the stars align in terms of, obviously you have to kind of build the skills and be ready positioned for the time when, the stars did align, that you were able to just kind of
Yes.
naturally benefit and it lined up to you.
So 100%. I'll go backwards with unpacking what you're saying. Sometimes, yeah,
Yeah.
if you catch it at the right time and the stars align, it's just perfect. It's amazing what happens. But what people don't realize, you may have spent 10 years building up to that because that's kind of what happened a little bit. That the time everything blew up in a good way, meaning the business and the need for it, I already had 10 plus years under my belt. So then it was natural when companies like Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs and Deutsche Bank and Credit Suisse and hedge funds, private equity shops, they would come to us because we were a known brand because we've been doing this for like 10 plus years and there weren't a lot of competition. So we really owned a big chunk of the space. And then over the course of 10, whatever years building up, then we really knew our stuff. Because to be fair, I was, I would say I would rank myself as a C in terms of like selling, marketing, that seriously at that time in my life, about a C.
Really?
Yeah. But what ends up happening, and this is really cool for people, who could appreciate it if you go through the same thing. You get a little win under your belt, right? You make a placement. You're like, oh wow, this is great. I made a placement. I'm making some nice money. You make another one and then another one. Then all of a sudden, those little victories give you that strength to feel more confidence and feel better about yourself. And then when you have that, then you kind of 10x it because now you've learned the skills. You understand what these jobs are. You know inside and out. You know who the players are. You know who the HR people, who the hiring managers are, and then you have the confidence to really go after people and sell them because it's really awkward. If anybody like Rick, if you've ever had someone, and I know you're staying at blind, no one's recruiting you, but at prior jobs, if they're recruiting you, you could tell the ones who are really good who could really tell us like the story to get you to move. compared to others that you could say is like, oh man, they're like a used car salesperson. This is just,
Right.
I'm no, even if it's a great job, I don't trust you. I'm out of here. So it's a combination of these things. So if you're going through your career and it's not necessarily going, it just might mean you need a little longer runway to get more confidence, to build up on it, to get more victories. And then, and you know what it is too, Rick? It's like, you know how they say, pursue your passion?
Right.
It's I find it's a weird, it's not exactly that. What ends up happening, I think, is that you do well at something and you're making money and you're succeeding, then you become passionate about it. Because like I wasn't passionate necessarily about, let's say, placing compliance officers. Nothing wrong, right, and different. It just wasn't passionate. It was something. But I
Right.
became passionate, not to be gross about it, became passionate when I know, wow, I can make money at it. I could build a business on it. I can make a living. I could provide for my family. I could provide for my future retirement. So then complete passion, complete utter, if you ask my wife, obsession, is like obsession. Like most people thought my wife was a single mom because I was constantly working. And these are the days it wasn't remote work. So we
Right.
were in New York City. We lived on the Upper West Side, had one kid, two kids. Thought, okay, now we got to go to a suburb. So we have room, grass, have to commute back and forth. So it was a whole different ball game and how this played out. So I would always be working, and the time I would come home, I would eat, work some more, and nonstop. So it just that becomes that your passion because you're so driven and you keep wanting to get those dopamine hits that it's hard to stop.
Yeah, I mean, I think people underestimate the impact of that, like, positive feedback, we'll say,
Mhm.
right? Because it could be anything from your manager or your peer or, like, even a client saying, like, "Hey, that's a job well done, Rick. Like, kudos to you," to, obviously when the hard dollars start hitting your bank account, right?
Mhm.
When you start landing these bonuses, when you start, earning these promotions with these, like, pay hikes, or you get that, refresher for your stock-based comp, and you start seeing your TC, your total comp, just go higher and higher. I think people really underestimate kind of that value, right? Because we're often told like, hey, money is taboo, like it shouldn't be the only thing, but it can certainly be a driver for folks, right? In terms of almost serving as a proof point and saying, hey, like your pay is getting higher or you're landing that bonus, and you're getting that feedback in the sense like, oh, I'm actually good at this, right? And when you're good at this, you're probably going to be more motivated to continue working and doing more of that. And it
Yeah.
seems like that was certainly the case with your background.
You're so right, because what happens is this, and I'll be very candid about it. When you kind of
Yeah.
feel like a loser, like trying things, it's not working, trying things, not working, it wrecks your self-esteem and it wrecks, your mental health, but you keep trying. So then when you do latch on to something that works, it's like the best feeling in the world because you're like, oh, all right, I'm not going to be a loser for the rest of my life. All right, I can, have a family, I can have everything. And then you also get to the point where it's not, this is something with money. It's great to have, right? But also it gives you that number one security, but then also it allows you to do other things. So for instance, the last few years has been just chaotic for recruiting. But what happened, I was a few years back started looking where things are going, and it didn't look so great for the recruiting area because of the economy and the job market. So I about probably be 6 years now that I started writing for Forbes because I was an okay writer. I like writing. I wrote a blog for my company just to kind of keep everybody in touch with what's going on. Someone at Forbes saw it and they said, "Hey, you probably would be good. Would you join?" And I said, yeah, fine, great. And I would write about leadership in careers. So it could run through anything about, hey, what's Elon Musk doing to how to negotiate salaries and everything in between. And then I met with Rick and doing the Blind Ambition podcast. So sometimes also what ends up happening is that when you're able to build a nest egg, it gives you open opportunities so you don't feel trapped. So let's say if I didn't save or I squandered my money or I lived big buying a Lamborghini and the like ginormous house in the Hamptons or whatever, or really speculating on crypto, I was really very focused on making sure that I would have something for the future so that if I ever wanted to do certain things that didn't make a lot of money, I could do it because I enjoyed doing it, and obviously I want to make some money on it too, but the pressure is off. So then you could keep going and be happy for a lot of years as you get older, because you see so many people who are working and they hate it and they're miserable because they didn't save and they didn't, and like they're getting older and they're bitter. So this way you could do things you want to do and it gives you that freedom. And having that freedom is just amazing. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
no, it makes absolute sense in terms of, I think a lot of folks, they tend to get into this habit or this mind of thinking of, money is almost like points in a video game,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where you're accumulating it for the sake of accumulating it. And maybe there's a sense for some folks that like just generally more is better than less. But they get to this point where they've earned a lot and they keep going. And I mean, it's fine, but they almost kind of forget like what money can do, right? In sense
Mm-hmm.
of it's a tool to provide for your family or to provide for yourself, to give you that kind of freedom or stability or independence, even to be willing to try other things or do other things rather than kind of getting in this like loop of, well, I'm just, over time, I should be getting more promotions or be
Mm-hmm.
getting more raises or saving more is generally the right thing to do. But it's almost like you're stuck with the process rather than what it can unlock. And I really appreciate that reminder in sense of, yeah, actually, maybe you should kind of work up and earn that money, and then they'll let you kind of branch out in your career and kind of find those passions or go deeper into those passions.
Absolutely. And then you could always return back too, because you still have those
Right.
muscle memory for that. So it's not as if you have to close the door. So then you have more options. Um, and if I may, like this is sort of kind of, for my career journey, if this helps in terms of the mindset, not that I'm cheap, but I kind of am cheap, but like I always felt, that I didn't, you'd always see these people, right? We all know these people. They make $1 and they'll spend $10. They got to get, the fancy house, the fancy car, the fancy this, the fancy. I was always thinking, and maybe I'm not saying I'm right or wrong, different. I just everyone has their way of like looking at life and work. So I was always figuring, hey, I want to look long term. So I don't need that huge mansion and that huge mortgage. I don't need to get, this brand, Porsche or this, I'm not going to live like a monk, but I always want to make sure that I don't live way beyond my means, which is a huge problem, particularly in certain neighborhoods, Silicon Valley, New York, LA, they're like, you have to keep up with the
Guilty.
Joneses. And it's very hard not to do that. It's very hard to say, you know what, I'm not going to fall into that trap, because then you realize, and we've all seen this, like I've seen it on Blind, where someone will put down their total net, earnings, and it's a lot of money. Let's say it's total comp is 500,000, and they list off like all their expenses, like have no money left. I'm like, to me, I'm like,
Wow.
what is wrong with you? Like, I seriously, when I saw like this, I saw some guy posted that a little while back. I really want to find out who this guy was and thrash him and said, what are you doing? What are you doing? This is crazy. It was literally bothering me, because what's going to happen if the well dries up? What are you going to do then? I mean, that's kind of I mean, maybe you could be like an amazing, software engineer and it's going to keep coming. It could be, and that's fine. But what if it's not? So I think part of, you know, what, about like myself is, and everyone's different. I always rather not have that stress and anxiety and know that, all right, if everything comes to a stop, I'm still cool. I'm still okay. And I don't have to worry. And that helps out with your career too, because you know when you deal with people who are financially insecure, insecure about their job, sometimes they're the hardest to deal with because they're so frantic and understandably so. And then it's hard for them, particularly when they interview, it's hard for them to come across well because they're so nervous, they're so frantic, they're worried if I don't get this
Right.
job, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, I have my kids going to college, and then you don't perform well. So I'm throwing that in because that mindset, in my opinion, is very helpful in terms of part of your whole career trajectory.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, it's almost like the stakes are too high,
Mm.
right? And I mean, I hate to say this, I don't know about your experience as a recruiter, but as a hiring manager, when I'm on the other side of the table and I'm making these decisions, sometimes you can feel it
Oh
during
yeah.
the interview, right? And anyway, I mean, this might not be the best thing to say, but as the interviewer, as the hiring manager, sometimes it gives you the worst vibes, right? And they tend to do worse, and you tend to have a poor impression of the candidate. And so, like in terms of setting yourself up for success, just not having that right mindset in
Mhm.
terms of kind of being, I would say, like wise with your money or thrifty even, can certainly harm your professional prospects even.
All the time, Rick. It happens all the time. You feel it on them. It's just like when you ever go into a room and you just get this vibe, this feel, like either you feel like very welcome and it's great, or just like something's off.
Oh, poor guy, right? Yeah.
Right? Same thing with the candidate. They come in and you could tell they're carrying a lot of baggage. And if someone's going to hire them, they're like, I don't want to hire someone with a lot of baggage. There's something wrong there. Is it right, wrong? I mean, I don't know, but it impacts how well or not well you do in the interview process.
Right. I mean, are there other things that, from your experience, 20 plus years in recruiting, giving folks like career advice, kind of almost similar, kind of almost counter instinctual or counterfactual things that folks might not know, that things outside of the workplace that they're doing, these habits, these beliefs that they have that are actually impacting how they're seen at work or how they're seen when they're applying for a job?
How about this? There's this thing that I don't think many people talk about when you have a hiring manager. You hire people from time to time. You may have all the right experiences, all the right credentials, but you may lose out to another candidate who is upbeat, who is positive, who has charisma, who has a likability factor, who resonates like I this could be that go-to person. And what happens, I notice with a lot of interviews, people come in and they're very robotic. They're waiting for the
Hmm.
question, answer the question, get another question, answer the question. And you can't get a good feel for that. And as we talked before, sometimes people come in with that baggage and they just feel like I kind of toxic.
The vibes are off. Yeah.
But if you come in and you come across as the person who you just like and you feel good about, like the person could have small talk. So like when before the interview starts, a little chit chat, a little whatever, and maybe you did some homework on the interviewer, so you know that they're a fan of the Kansas City Chiefs or whatever it might be. So you open up a dialogue, and then maybe you find something in common, and now you're talking and you're laughing, you're getting a good vibe. That that is very important. And I've seen over the years the person who could do that, who could be the schmoozer, but in a good way. Like schmoozer has like a negative connotation, but it's meaning that you could talk with somebody, you could bond with a person, and then the interview hiring manager really feels that connection, and they like you because you have emotion, you're excited, and you're upbeat. That wins a lot of the offers because that's what they want. Like a hiring manager would want someone who has all the skills, yes. But if they're just a pain in the ass to deal with and annoying and they have a crappy personality and they're always like irritable, it's like, I'd rather go with the other person who has more positive attributes, even if they're not as good, because I could at least, I feel I could work better with that person. And then I could always teach them the things that they need to learn. So that's one thing I think that people don't talk enough about is how you come across, and you want to come across basically as a winner. You want to come across as someone who could get things done. And as the boss, Rick, if someone is going there, knowing that if you call me, late at night, weekends, I'm there for you. I'm going to be there. And, you feel it when you have those candidates. And that's what they want. And it is reasonable, right? It's just reasonable because you need that person who you're hiring to help you get up the ladder and do well. So that's I think that's something is very underrated.
I think just not to kind of to break it down and not to kind of oversimplify it, it's certainly not a defense of the so-called personality
Mm,
hire, but from my end
yeah.
as a hiring manager, some of these roles that I'm interviewing for, I have dozens of folks, even at the like final stages,
Mhm,
the in-person interviews, the panel interviews. And the one thing that I found works really well for myself in my career, and I certainly see it on now that I'm on the other side as a hiring manager, is um, being able to kind of craft a story around your candidacy, around your resume, right? Because, as a hiring manager, when I get to kind of the debriefs, after we've interviewed the candidates at the final panel interview, sometimes we're talking about dozens of people. And, when it's for a certain role and when it's for a senior role, the experiences tend to be very similar, right? They all have the hard skills. They all worked at great companies. That's why we brought them in and they got so far in the rounds that they did. But sometimes, to your point, they're a little robotic, right? No one stands out. Sometimes, I hate to say this to all the people that might be listening that might have interviewed with me previously, but sometimes I say, which candidate are we talking about
mm,
again? I'm in the panel and roundtable. I'm on the conference call debrief and saying like, oh gosh, like I don't even know which candidate we're talking about. But one kind of strategy or tactic that I've used myself when I'm a candidate is I think far ahead and I say, gosh, when the hiring manager and the recruiter and all the people that I'm meeting in the panel interview, I don't want that to happen. I want them to remember, oh, Rick was the
mm,
guy that was a self-taught PR person, right? Or Rick is the guy that, super energetic and super bubbly and he likes to travel. He's the worldly guy or something, like almost kind of crafting a cheat code or a narrative or a messaging for who you want to be and really kind of sticking to it and reinforcing that in your responses during your interview, making sure the stories and examples that you point to or that you cite kind of match that same story. It's almost like a reality show. I've been watching a lot of reality TV, and the producers there, they always do the edits, right? And in post production, and you're like, oh, by the time you watch the episode, you're like, oh, that character is the crazy person, right? They get into crazy edits.
yeah.
Like all of the edits, whenever they're shown on TV, they're super dramatic, right? Like they're almost become caricatures. And when I interview, I like to think in the same way. Like, how can I almost be kind of an exaggeration or a character where I'm saying things so much to the same point that they can only interpret my candidacy or my job application as one way, right? Like, oh, Rick is the X, and like all of his examples, like, oh yeah, he really is that kind of guy,
Mm.
right?
That makes so much sense. It makes so much because like if you have so many candidates and they all blend together, which happens all the time. If you have someone like, oh, I just got back from Japan, I just got back from Korea, I just did something that stands out. They go, wow, what's Korea like? What's Japan like? So you're right, because then it makes them stand out that they remember you compared to like 20 other people who meh, just to
You're
say,
the 10th guy from
yeah,
Goldman
yeah,
Sachs,
yeah,
or you're the fifth Google engineer
yeah.
that they've met with, right?
It's really smart advice. Yeah, absolutely.
No, so Jack, I really
Mhm.
appreciate you for being a part of the blind experience,
Mhm.
and lending your name to this podcast, and continuing to give back not only to just the professionals that you work with at your firm, but also our community on blind, in terms of all of that career advice, and all of that support in terms of like really breaking down what the heck is going on
Mhm.
with the career world, because certainly in the last 2 3 years, god, it's been a roller coaster. So thanks for being
Yeah.
that stable voice there.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you. This was fun. It's weird to be on the other side of it because I'm so used to asking the questions. So this is great. This is awesome.
Yeah, thanks for letting me flip the
Thanks.
script there.
Well, thank you, Rick. Thanks so much.